John A recently went viral because a girl made a reaction video to a TPUSA faith event that she attended, and she was not happy with what she was hearing. So first, let me explain how John A came on my radar. So after the Charlie Kirk assassination, there were a lot of people saying, hey, he's racist, we don't like him. And a lot of people, including other pastors and people who have worked with Charlie Kirk in some capacity, they came out and said, hey, he's not racist, this is why. He's platformed me, he's given interviews with me, he's been very involved in platforming and helping Black voices when it comes to dealing with Black issues. So John A was one of those people, and he's actually a pretty good pastor or preacher in my opinion from what I've heard. However, I haven't really been wanting to watch his videos where he is basically going after Candace. It just wasn't something that I was interested in watching, but for the purposes of this video, I may go back and watch it just to see really what he is arguing when it comes to Candace Owens. Now, getting back to John A, so I did watch his full sermon. I'm not sure when he posted it, but it must have been within the last few days. And I did come across Sarah's video earlier in the week, and I watched a few minutes of it and just kind of put it away in the back of my mind. I couldn't figure out who she was talking about, but people in the comments said that she was talking about John A. And so really all we had was her word to go off of at that point. However, after watching John A's sermon, I did go back and watch her video in full. I'm actually really confused on what she's complaining about, and we're going to get into that in this video. This is Hey Brittany, welcome back. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and get into it. So Sarah did a video. We can go ahead and listen to her talk a little bit about her experiences with John A's sermon.
So I went to a TPUSA faith event tonight, and I want to talk about it. Thinking that I was going to enjoy myself and learn things because TPUSA is obviously a conservative faith-based foundation, or so I thought. I thought I was going to be informed about politics stemming strictly from biblical principles, and that's not my experience.
So I want to pause it here because she said that she went to this event because she was hoping to learn something, and I can understand why she's expecting to learn something. It almost sounds like she was expecting to hear a classroom type of lecture or to be given a bunch of facts or whatever. And obviously when you are listening to someone, especially a pastor or a preacher, speak in this way, it's not so much that they're giving you facts or additional information that you may not know, but they are going to preach to you from their perspective. So with that in mind, I feel like her expectations for this sermon, for this event, were not in line with what she was going to get, and that's why she's unhappy.
So right off the bat, the speaker comes up, and before he even gets into preaching or talking about politics, he begins by calling out Candace Owens and saying that she is evil and anti-Semitic and what she's doing is evil. I immediately wanted to leave. I didn't want to be there any longer listening to this nonsense because right off the bat I know that that's just not true. And the only reason I didn't leave is because on the way in I basically got...
Okay, so the second half of that video is the most important thing because she talks about how right off the bat he started going in on Candace, and it actually wasn't until 8 minutes into the sermon that he starts bringing up Candace, and he probably only talks about her for 2 or 3 minutes. And keep in mind, this is a 31-minute sermon. If he's spending 2 or 3 minutes talking about Candace, he, one, could be saying a lot with those 2 or 3 minutes, or he could be saying very little. And he's not saying a bunch of stuff about Candace Owens, but he's using very strong terminology when he's talking about her during those 2 or 3 minutes. So I can understand why someone would be bothered by that, especially if you are a Candace Owens fan and you've been watching her content, you know the backstory between her and Charlie Kirk. You're going to be sensitive to that, and I'm going to break down that part a little bit later, but I do feel like this is kind of a little bit misleading because he was talking about other stuff related to politics and religion for those first 8 minutes before Candace Owens' name came up. Now, the other thing that she goes on to talk about is how basically he was calling the left name. She mentioned that the speaker brought up Tucker Carlson. I did not hear Tucker Carlson's name in this speech, so I was a little bit confused on if she was actually talking about John A. or if she was talking about the event as a whole, and I would assume that they had other speakers there because, again, I did not hear Tucker Carlson's name. And if you've listened to John A A's videos or watch his videos on YouTube, you know that he has a very specific way of speaking. He's very direct and he's not afraid to offend you and all of that stuff, right? And so he, throughout this sermon, he's like, you are a fool, or you are foolish, that's foolish. Like, he is very strong in what his perception is of you if you believe certain things. And Candace is kind of the same way, where she has that strong language. Candace will say, hey, if you think X, Y, and Z, you're an idiot, okay? He talks like that, so they talk the same. And so I can understand why, if you don't know this person or you don't know their delivery and their communication style, you would be put off by that, because there are a lot of people saying that they don't like how Candace is talking because she seems gossipy and blah, blah, blah. And so my point is, they talk the same. So I'm not necessarily offended by how he's talking, because Candace talks that way, and I've also seen John A's content before, so it's not like I'm encountering him for the first time. And the other thing is just the general point of her video. I have no idea why she's confused or bothered by his sermon. If you've been paying attention to politics since before Charlie Kirk got assassinated, and if you've been paying attention to politics since before the election, all of the issues that John A. talked about have been discussed at length in the public sector on social media. So it's not like he's given a new spin on anything. Everything that he said in this video I've heard before, and I think a lot of people agree with what he said. It's really just the Candace Owens part, and again, I'm going to break that down in a few minutes. Moving in, I want to get into kind of like the 30-minute clip that was posted of John A's sermon, and I thought it was interesting that because people have the trailer of kind of like the highlight of the video at the beginning for the first like 10 seconds, and then they let the actual video play, and so he has as his preview clip what he said about Candace Owens. So contrary to what Candace Owens says, that part he has as his preview, so obviously he wants that to be the highlight of the video, and I don't know if that was how he would have done it before this video went viral, or if that was the plan. So I did find that interesting, and again, I don't know if that was intentional or if that would have always been the highlight clip for his sermon. So again, the reality is everything he talked about in his sermon is full of controversial topics, full of controversial opinion, and if you have been paying attention to politics, you've already heard these arguments before, so you shouldn't be super surprised by anything that John A is saying. Now, I'm going to get into the 10 points that he talks about in his sermon, but what I find super interesting is, of the 10 points, I'm pretty sure that Candace Owens would agree with him on every stance that he has, minus the Judeo-Christian stance, because obviously he uses that position to attack Candace Owens. And so I find it interesting that if they agree on most of these topics that they are talking about in this sermon, he's turning around and calling her evil and demonic. So if you share opinions with someone but they're evil and you're not, that's kind of not a good messaging to send, because either you're both evil because you think the same way, or neither one of you is evil. And so I do find that interesting, because I truly do believe, from what I've heard from Candace's shows, things that she said and all of that, I do think that they probably agree on maybe 8 to 9 of the 10 things that they talked about in this video. Alrighty, so let's get into the 10 points that John A is making throughout this sermon. So he's talking about schools and the school system. Candace has been saying, hey, get your kids out of the school system. He says men can't get pregnant. He talks about the Judeo-Christian stance. He talks about marriage, abortion, homosexuality, femininity. He talks about debasing art, using media to create fake news, and the interfaith movement. And then he also talks about the church bowing to culture. So all of these are very interesting topics. And again, they're topics that we've been talking about for the last year. So I do think that it is obviously a good thing that he's including all of this in his sermon. And again, if you haven't been watching conservative content creators, pastors, or anything like that, then yes, this is going to catch you off guard, but his stance is really no different from other people's stances, and obviously that could mean that you're watching a certain type of conservative content creator, or you are just not watching conservative content creators at all. Now, I have a few clips I want to play of what I feel like are the highlights of some of his comments throughout this sermon. So I want to play a clip on him talking about or responding to men who think they can get pregnant.
Back home. Amen, somebody. And so I honor my wife on tonight, who has given birth to all 3 of our children. And I say it that way intentionally, because we live in a day and a time where people think that men can get pregnant. And they can. we are starting to confuse a man's beer gut with a man's ability to bring forth a child. And every man who thinks that he can get pregnant, that has witnessed what a woman goes through in a delivery room, you are a fool.
So that's obviously what she's talking about, probably with him calling people names. He's going to be direct and do that. And I don't know if you caught it, but at the beginning he said amen somebody. I can't recall what he was saying, but basically he's talking about women and men being different at this point of the conversation. And this is the very beginning, right? And so he, throughout this video and in other videos I've seen, he does engage with the crowd where he'll try to get them to respond like, hey, say amen somebody, or big clap everybody, or don't be afraid, or whatever, right? He does that, and so it's not like he just did it for what he said about Candace Owens. He does that a lot throughout this sermon because he understands that what he's saying is so significant, and either it went over the audience's head, or he really wants to draw attention, like, hey, you need to be picking up what I'm dropping down here. So I don't think people aren't clapping because they don't like what he said. I think they're not clapping and not reacting because they don't fully understand the significance of what he's saying, at least from his perspective. So I think it's important to acknowledge that because people are comparing that to the Jeb Bush. Please clap, everybody.
In the national security interests of this country to get back in the business of creating a more peaceful world. Please clap.
That's a very different circumstance, and I don't think that that's what's happening here throughout this sermon, but I could be wrong. Then John A. goes on to talk about men dressing up as women, and I found this clip pretty funny.
Thing called cosmetic femininity. This is where men are beginning to dress up like women. They put on fishnet stockings, long dresses, wigs, makeup, high heel shoes, and they walk around as if they are a woman. No, they are freaks. AOC came out yesterday and talked about the courage of trans men and trans women. It doesn't take courage to dress up like Halloween.
So yeah, so again, depending on where you are in the trans movement, you either find this comment funny or you don't, because when he was saying that, I was honestly thinking of like Medea and the guys, the content creators who dress up as women and do their skits. So you can dress up to pretend to be a woman because you're trans or because you're trying to make content, and so take from it what you want. But here, he's very direct. He's going to call it like he sees it. He's not going to soften his words or kind of be afraid to hurt your feelings. He's going to call it like he sees it. He thinks that this is wrong to do this. He thinks that you're crazy and all of that stuff, right? So he's going to speak directly to that. And so if you are conservative, but you don't see an issue with the trans community and all of that stuff, cool, whatever works for you, right? But you would be offended by what he's saying here because his stance is, no, actually, I don't agree with that. Then he's going to talk about men and their role in society.
See, when a man squares his shoulder and speaks up, things have to change. That's why feminism is a great destruction on Western civilization. See, you can't talk a man down to a boy, and then when it's time for him to be a man, he doesn't know how to respond. And so now more than ever, we need the support of men to be who they are so that they can be on guard for the family. And guys, don't be afraid. You can clap your hands right there and feel comfortable.
So again, he is dropping some pretty great comments here, and either the audience isn't really picking up what he's saying, they don't know, but they can clap and cheer, whatever, but what he said is something that people would have clapped to if Allie Beth Stuckey said this. But interestingly, Allie Beth, when she did a Turning Point USA event, she said something like this, and that clip went viral, and people did not like that she said that, which was interesting, but I think people in the audience were clapping when she said that. So this, again, we've been talking about this stuff forever, for like a year now, and either you've heard this before or you haven't, and it's going to catch you off guard, but I don't think he's saying anything new here. This next part is interesting because he's going to talk about interfaith and religion, and I find this interesting, but I will also come back to this when I go through his comments on Candace.
She said, create an interfaith movement, number 9. And so, in other words, put Christianity on equal par with all other religions. Convince people that if you are a Buddhist, if you are Muslim, or atheists, that you're going to the same place ultimately as Christians, an interfaith movement. But we are not called to coexist.
I want to pause it here because this is interesting because he did not name Judaism in this section when he's talking about Christianity or the idea of making Christianity on the same level as other religions. He only says Buddhism and Islam or Muslim faith. He doesn't bring in Judaism, and there's a reason for that, and we'll get to that in a second.
And when you go to the scriptures, we have this pesky verse that just messes the plan up of being interfaith, you know? Simply because the Bible says that I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no man comes to the Father but by me. And so we can't coexist. It's either we are right or we are wrong.
So from what I understand, the verse that he is reading, I believe that's something that Jesus said, and not everybody accepts Jesus. So again, you can't call out Buddhism and being Muslim without calling out Judaism because they don't see Jesus the same way. So that is super interesting. Okay, moving on to his comments about Candace. So we're going to start, and how he begins this sermon is he's going to go through 10 points, and he refers to a woman named Alice Bailey, and he's basically talking about things that Alice Bailey wanted to do to basically take over the world and ruin Western civilization, and he's going to talk about Judeo-Christian, and I'm going to let the clip play, and then we can talk about it.
From it. Number 3. Alice Bailey said, destroy the Judeo-Christian family structure or the traditional Christian family structure. There are some people today who get angry when you talk about Judeo-Christianity. But let me make this plain. There will be no Christianity without Judaism. The foundation of Christianity is the Abrahamic covenant. God made a covenant to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who were all Jews. Let me make this plain tonight as well, that Jesus was a Jew.
I want to pause it here because this is super important because he's talking about Judeo-Christian, and a lot of people do not like that phrase. They think it's a contradiction, and they think it's a contradiction in the same way that they think Christian nationalism is a contradiction. Like those two things just simply cannot go together. Judaism is a different religion than Christianity, and the two really don't have any connection other than they're all Abrahamic religions. But the point is here is that he's talking about support for Judeo-Christian relationships, whatever, and a lot of people don't agree with this. So I can see this being an issue that people have a problem with, especially given our political culture and climate, but also some people do believe that you need to be Judeo-Christian. And this also goes back to what he was saying about interfaith. That's why he didn't mention Judaism when he was talking about Buddhism and Islam, because he sees Judaism and Christianity basically as the same thing. At least that's my spin on it.
So contrary to what Candace Owens is saying, who's spending her time trying to tear down the legacy of Charlie Kirk.
Okay, so let me pause it. So contrary to what Candace Owens is saying, so this is super interesting because he starts this clip and he's talking about Judeo-Christian families and the Christian family structure. So you think he's going to say something that Candace has done to ruin a family or somehow connect it back to Judeo-Christian, and the example that he gives doesn't really fit what he's talking about, and so I feel like he was just looking for a spot to plug in Candace's name so that he could basically call her out and condemn her during this sermon. And this was a weird moment for it because what Candace is doing is not necessarily related to being Judeo-Christian. In my opinion, you would call it something else or refer to it as something else, and so I think he's just trying to find a spot for her name in this sermon.
Fighting against Erica Kirk, his wife, I mean, you have to be cruel and demonic to insinuate the things that she has insinuated over the past several weeks. She's evil. That's what it is. And a big hand clap goes there. Don't get shy on me tonight. I ain't the one. I came too far to play around. It's evil.
So again, obviously, you know that Charlie Kirk was pro-Israel. Turning Point USA is a pro-Israel organization. Candace isn't attacking them because they're Judeo-Christian. She's attacking them because they won't speak up about Charlie Kirk's assassination, what they know. They won't help her with her investigation, that sort of thing. So it's not a direct attack on them being pro-Israel or Judeo-Christian. It's more so about the lack of transparency, and they just happen to be a pro-Israel organization. That's a really weird way to say it, but I really just don't see a reason for him to bring up Candace in this part of what he's saying or in his sermon at all. And so I think because he's talking about a family, that's why he felt like it was the best example of where Candace is going wrong, but she hadn't really attacked their family. And if you really want to be direct and clear, Charlie Kirk's family was torn apart when someone decided to shoot him and assassinate him in public. That is why his family is a broken family. It's not because of anything that Candace is doing. So I just feel like this isn't a good example to talk about Candace, and it's not a good way to label what she's doing, in my opinion. And then obviously he goes on to talk about how Candace Owens wishes she was in Erica Kirk's shoes, and that's really an awful thing to say. So what you're really saying is, some people are trying to say, oh, she wants to be the heir and the queen of Turning Point USA. She feels like she's earned it, blah, blah, blah. But the other thing, or the flip side of what you're saying, is that you're saying Candace Owens wishes that it was her husband who was assassinated, it's her kids that she wishes were fatherless and all of that stuff. And so when you put it in that perspective, you understand how gross what you're saying is. And Candace has gone on her show and said that she doesn't want to be the heir of Turning Point USA. So it's weird to keep pushing that narrative as if that's truly what she's going after. She has her own empire. She has her own thing going. She doesn't need Turning Point USA. Like, obviously, I would imagine that she would want to help support her friend's organization and business, but at the end of the day, she doesn't need to be the heir of Turning Point USA. She has her own thing going on. So what exactly has Candace Owens said about Judaism and Christianity? She said that Judaism is a religion. She acknowledges that, but she also says that you have the right to criticize a foreign government, specifically the Israeli government.
You know, Judaism is a faith. Israel is a state, and it is not above critique.
So you can understand the distinction there. She's not criticizing the Jewish religion itself. She's criticizing the people who are using that as a shield to basically do whatever they want, and also to force other people to support their movement, their cause, and all of that stuff. So again, there are people who do think that Judeo-Christian isn't a thing. It's a contradiction, the same way Christian nationalist is a contradiction. Now, the next comment that he makes about Candace Owens, I think, is the most revealing because it's kind of condescending and a little bit sexist, so we're just going to play what he says.
It's evil. It's corrupt. It should not take place. She sounds like a jaded person who wish they were in the role that Charlie Kirk's wife is in, but she isn't. And so therefore, she seeks to tear down his legacy. And at some point, her husband is going to have to walk into that podcast room and start unplugging cords. I mean, by now I would have already done it if it was my wife. I'm yanking cords, I'm shutting down the camera, shut down the ATEM. Sweetie, get up, get out of this room, and can you please help out with the kids?
So the ending there was pretty condescending. Can you please help out with the kids? Like, obviously, she's a working mother. She has a job. She talks about homeschooling her kids, and I believe that she is homeschooling them up until the time that she does her videos and goes live and all of that stuff, right? And so I did a whole video talking about whether or not George Farmer should be stepping in and shutting Candace Owens down, so I won't spend too much time on that here. But basically, I think if your wife is working, you do not have the right to come in and start turning her equipment off. There's a way that you handle this, and you then don't say, hey, can you help with the kids? Like, I'm sure she's been helping you with the kids, right? So this is her time for her work to say what she wants to say, and then she goes back to her family. And so I feel like this is just a way to kind of shut Candace Owens up so that you don't have to deal with how uncomfortable her words are making you, regardless of whether or not you believe she's saying the right thing or you think that she's saying the wrong thing. She does have the right to have her platform, and if you don't like what she has to say, then simply don't watch. Moving on, he goes on to talk about being the proverbial victim, but he's more so talking about race, and I find that this is interesting, and we'll just go ahead and play the clip.
I said that we don't need critical race theory where we label whites as inherently racist and blacks as proverbial victims. Let me tell you something, man. I'm 6'4", 250 pounds. I'm too big and black to be anybody's victim. And the last time I checked, the Bible calls me a royal priesthood. So how are you going to be royalty and a victim at the same time? It just makes no sense.
I want to pause it here because he's talking about this in the context of race, but he's also just talking about race and politics at this point. He's not talking about religion. So you can't also be a religious victim, right? And so that's the problem that people have when it comes to the government of Israel and the position that they have, because they say that the current Israel is not the same Israel that's in the Bible, and obviously they're the chosen people. They are the people that are setting an example and also being made an example of, and so people are misunderstanding that and thinking that this means that they are special, they are superior to everybody, and that's not necessarily what it means.
I have too much grace and favor on my life for me to be anybody's victim. And I don't have to be subservient to the Democrat Party. I wasn't born Democrat. I was born in sin, shaping in iniquity. But I have a right to choose to support Republican candidates. Let me say that again. I have a right.
So again, you have a right to choose who you want to support politically, you have a right to choose who you want to support religiously, and you have a right to support whoever you want in terms of race. So this is pretty interesting because he goes on to talk about DEI, or he is talking about DEI at this portion. He's basically saying we don't need this, and he talks about how he goes around to the school systems. He's been kicked out, he's been escorted out by cops, and so he's really trying to change the school system as far as critical race theory, how kids are being taught, how they're taught to think about themselves and all of that stuff, because he does see this as a huge problem in America. And then he goes on to talk about white liberals, and I think that this is interesting as well because I know that Thomas Sowell wrote a book where he's talking about white liberals and black rednecks, I think is the title, and I think that this is just an interesting comment because again, we've been talking about the race issues forever, but we've also been talking about it since before the election.
I also said that we don't need diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then I just hit him in the jaw when I said this. I said, we don't need white liberals telling us that they know what's best for us than we know what's best for ourselves. Head started to explode. Oh my gosh, we got to get this weirdo out of here. And 2 weeks later, they were writing articles about me, calling me a white supremacist. Just go. I'm the blackest white supremacist that you'll ever meet. I guess so, right? So I wake up in the morning and look at my black wife and say, baby, I want to be the best white man that I could possibly be to you. I want to love you like a white man, talk like a white man, dress like a white man, like a white man. White men, how am I doing? See, I'm not even doing well. But it's fun.
So that was pretty funny, and it made me think of Candace Owens because she did just do an interview with Elle Reeves, I can't recall what her last name is, but she just did an interview and she was talking about, hey Candace, you're promoting white nationalist rhetoric. Do you understand that you're doing that? And Candace was like, yeah, I just have to chuckle, like, I'm black, I'm obviously not a white nationalist, and so I don't like the idea that if you think something that is attributed to one group, that means that you're like that group, even if that's not something that you actually are. It's just a way to label your ideas and prevent you from saying that thing or thinking that way. And so here he's talking about his own experiences with that just because he thinks a certain way, that people tell him, oh, you're a white nationalist, you support those views, blah blah blah, and that's not really what's happening. Like, they don't own those ideas or those perspectives, but you are shamed as if they do, so that you don't promote that or you don't try to repair society from what was done to it to make it this fractured and to make it this chaotic to exist in a community. Alrighty, so that's everything that I wanted to cover in this video. I did think that this was a pretty good sermon, and there's nothing shocking or surprising here. And John A. is a black man, so he is going to add a racial perspective to his sermon. If he was white, he obviously would have talked about critical race theory and DEI a little bit differently than he did in this sermon. But again, if you've been watching conservative content creators, you shouldn't be surprised by anything that he said in this video. I do want to obviously acknowledge where I felt there were contradiction between Judeo-Christian, what Candace is doing, and all of that stuff with interfaith and having a even level playing field for the religion. She obviously doesn't believe that that should be a thing, and so you have to acknowledge that he doesn't include Judaism when he's talking about all religions, and that obviously is something that you should take note of. So let me know your thoughts on John A's full sermon. Let me know your thoughts on Sarah. Do you think that she properly reflected what John A said in his sermon? Was there anything that you felt was inappropriate or was out of line? Was there anything new that you heard for the first time? Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.